Good morning.
Yep. Apologize for going off mute yesterday, Rabbi.
Oh, that's okay. Okay. Why don't we get started? We're going to start Sif Beis today of the laws of Gezela and Geneva. And the Rav Shulchan Aruch states as follows. Va'afilu mishuhu b'sakanas maves. Even if a person is in mortal danger, b'tzorach litol mamon chaveru kedei lahatzil nafsho mimaves. And there you would be justified in stealing. You're allowed to steal in order to save your life. There are other things you're allowed to do in order to save your life. You're allowed to eat non-kosher in order to save your life. You're allowed to violate Shabbos in order to save your life. And you're allowed to steal in order to save your life. But with that said, in other words, there are only three mitzvahs that we know of that stand in the face of pikuach nefesh, of saving a life. What are those three? What are the three cardinal sins?
Murder, immorality, and idol worship.
Yeah, right. Right, exactly. So as long as you're not committing those three, you have an obligation to preserve your life. And so stealing is justifiable when you need to save a life. Okay, so, let's say you need a particular drug and you can't get it. So you would be allowed to steal in order to save the person's life. But with all of that said, lo yitlenu ela al das l'shalim. You're not allowed to take it unless you have the intention of paying back eventually. Sha'afal pi shekol ha'avera shebetorah nidchos mipnei pikuach nefesh chutz me'avodah zarah v'gili arayos u'shvichus damim. And as he writes, he says, even though all sinful acts of the Torah are overridden by life-saving measures, except for the three cardinal sins, idolatry, adultery, and murder, nonetheless, asur lahatzil atzmo b'mamon chavero al da'as lihipater. But you're still not allowed to save your life or save someone else's life using someone else's property without having any intention of paying back. Ella al das l'shalom. But rather, you have to have the intent, at least, to compensate the person for what you've taken or the property that you've damaged in the course of saving a life. Kishatim siyada, when you have the wherewithal to pay. Hol ve'efsher b'tashlumin. And the reason is that you can always mitigate the sin of theft by paying back for what you stole. And therefore, even though you're allowed to violate the laws of theft in order to save a life, but you have to mitigate the prohibition as much as possible. Okay, ve'af al das l'shalem lo huter elam mipnei pikuach nefesh. And furthermore, the only time that we permit theft with the intent to pay back is only for pikuach nefesh, is only when you want to save a life. But if it's anything less than saving a life, you cannot justify stealing for any other reason. Aval shelo b'makom pikuach nefesh, asur afilu al das l'shalem davar yafa mimenu. Right? And even if your intention is to pay a person more than what the object is worth, you're still not allowed to steal. Okay, va'afilu l'refuas choli she'ein bo sakana. And this is true if you have a really good, even if when you have a really good reason. Like, I have a really good reason to steal. Let's say I need medication to alleviate a certain ailment that's not life-threatening. It's not life-threatening, but it's painful, or it's really important. Or let's say I can steal in order to help save me from a predicament, a non-life-threatening predicament. He gives an example of when you're under, when you're getting physically harmed by someone, but he's not threatening your life, right? So yeah, there are some very difficult situations that you could really save yourself from by just committing an act of theft, right? But you still can't justify it. Mipnei shehu iser shel Torah, why? Because you can't violate any mitzvah in the Torah unless it's for life-saving measures. Ve'ein misrapeim shelo b'makom sakana ela be'iser divrei sofrim kamo shekasav b'yoredei simin kuf nun hey. And we'll have to take a look at this halacha. You're not allowed to cure yourself from an ailment that is not life-threatening. In other words, if your life is not in danger, but you have a particular illness that can be cured by violating the Torah, you're not allowed to do that unless it's only a rabbinic law. If it's a rabbinic law, there are times when the rabbis suspend rabbinic law to help cure you from even a non-life-threatening ailment. And we'll take a look at that in the Shulchan Aruch. Va'afilu lignov al menas l'shalim tashlumei kefil. But now he says, I'll take it even further. Let's say your objective is, I'm going to steal from this guy so that what? So that I can pay him back double of what I stole. Why? Sherotze lahanhoso v'yodea shelo yekabel mimenu. Because I want to give the guy some tzedakah, because I know he could use the money, but I know he's going to refuse to take it. So you come up with this whole ruse. You come up with this great idea. Why don't I steal something from him? And then he'll take me to court, and the Beis Din will make me liable not only to pay back what I stole, but I'll have to pay double of what I stole. Because remember, we learned that's what happens when you commit an act of geneva. And that way, I'll be able to get the money that he needs. I'll be able to give it to him. Right? That's your whole sinister plan, right? You really are doing it. You're doing a sin so that you can help a guy. He says that you can't do either. He says, Umi kol makom im hagezela hu chayf. But now that we've listed all of the prohibitions, let's now take a look at a certain dispensation. Im hagezela hu chayfetz ha'omed limacher v'lo mecheftzei beso. But let's say the object in question is merchandise that the owner is normally designated for sale. It's not a personal item of his. V'hatashlumin ba'ad hagezela heim be'en. So, and you have cash to pay for it, but the guy's not around. So Rashai Ligzol ulazakos lo hatashlumin al yedei acher. What you are allowed to do is you can say, listen, I know that you're a friend of his. I know that he wants to sell this item, but he's out of town now. So, and we can't reach him. So here, you take the money, I'll take the object, and by you taking the money, you are acquiring it on his behalf. And the reason why you're allowed to do this is shekevin shahatashlumin yafin mehagezela. The argument goes like this. If you're giving a good price, meaning that the price is worth more than what the merchandise is worth, then you're doing the owner a favor by purchasing the item without his knowledge. So normally purchasing something without someone's consent is prohibited. And there's a prohibition in the Torah called Hamas, which is ironic because that's the name of a modern organization. But Hamas in the Torah is where you force someone to sell you something against his will, even though you're willing to pay for it. That's a Torah prohibition. But let's say the person is not here, and by all indicators, and based on our knowledge of that person, we assume that he would want to sell it to me. So if you can figure out how to get him the money right away by giving it to a friend of his who will acquire it on his behalf, and you're paying over market price for this object, and it's not a personal item, but rather something that he had meant to sell, and you have every indication that he wants to sell it, but he's just not available right now. So you are allowed to go ahead under certain limited circumstances and take it without getting his consent, as long as you pay for it right away. And we have this concept of zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. We have a concept of we do an act that is desirable to a person even in his absence. We assume this is what he would want, and that's why we do it. By the way, that's when we talk about zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, that we act on behalf of a person in absentia when we know that it's to their benefit. There are many, many applications of this halacha. But one application of this halacha that's coming up shortly is mechiras chametz. One of the things that I do when I sell the chametz to the non-Jew is that I tell the non-Jew that there are people in my congregation who are members who have not filled out their form and have not deposited it with me. I'm hereby selling the chametz on their behalf as well, even the people who are not listed in this stack of papers that I'm giving you. And the reason why, according to some poskim, this works. We don't advocate that you do this lechatchila. Lechatchila, you should fill out your mechiras chametz form and submit it to us. But if you, for whatever reason, you don't do it, I will be selling your chametz on your behalf, even if you don't ask me to, because of the principle of zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. I know that you would want me to sell your chametz. And so I'm including you in the sale, even though you haven't expressly told me to do so. Now, the fact of the matter is that it may not work so well, and that's the reason why you shouldn't rely on it lechatchila, but you should just know. Okay, anyway, what's the next thing he says? V'gam eino over beval tignovu she'ein zu geneva. He says, and you're not going to violate if you do it this way on the laws of stealing, because it's not geneva. Kevin sheha'acher yodea mizeh v'hu eino osa ze behester klal. Since you're notifying a third party and you're telling him, I'm giving you cash, you're going to hold on to this cash on behalf of the owner of this merchandise. I want you to take possession of it on his behalf, and then I'm going to take the merchandise. So there's no problem of geneva in the sense that, geneva means that you steal something by stealth and you don't inform anyone. Here you're informing a person that you're taking this. So you can't anymore, therefore, call it an act of, it's not an act of geneva, and it's not an act of gezela, because we assume that the person wants to sell it. So again, you have to really know this in order to be able to justify it. You can't just say, I'm sure he would want to sell it. You have to know for a fact that it's something that he wants to sell, that he was trying to sell it. He couldn't find anyone to buy it. And now he's not here right now, and you're coming and you're going to be going very soon. And so it'll be a missed opportunity for him and for you if you don't go ahead and buy it. Okay. So that's the basic halacha. So let's take a look now at some of the commentary. V'tzarech litol mamon chavero. So that whenever a person's life is in mortal danger, we do justify stealing in order to save your life. And the Imrei Yaakov goes even further, and he says, "U'mechuyevu litol kedei lahatzil atzmo v'ilav mischayev benavsho." So it's not just that permission is granted to steal. Let's be very clear. You're obligated to steal in order to save your life. It's not just that it's at your discretion. If you want to save your life, you can steal. And if you don't want to save your life, if you don't want to steal, you can let yourself die. You're not allowed to let yourself die. If there's a way to save your life and the only way to do it is by stealing, you're obligated to steal, just like Shabbos observance, right? In other words, if you can save someone's life by violating Shabbos, it's not that you have permission and it's at your discretion to violate. You're obligated to be machal Shabbos in order to save a life, right? Okay, so it's a basic halacha. And if you don't violate the law and you let the person die, then you're guilty of committing murder passively by letting someone die without having stolen or violated Shabbos or whatever the other prohibition might be. And so, this has very many applications in the laws of Shabbos as well. When we say that you violate Shabbos in order to save a life, it's because the mitzvah of saving a life is far greater than the mitzvah of observing Shabbos. And therefore, if you are with a group of people, and let's say you're a group of doctors, and it's Shabbos, and you have an opportunity to save someone's life, you shouldn't say to yourself, well, it's Shabbos, let me let someone else do it. You should say, 1 second, we're all Jewish doctors. All of us have the commandment of Shabbos, but all of us have the commandment of saving a life, which is an even bigger mitzvah. Why should I forsake the mitzvah of saving a life by letting someone else do it? I want to do it. You should take the initiative and say, I want to be Mechalel Shabbos before I let anyone else be Mechalel Shabbos. Now, that's only when there's no other way to save his life, right? If there's a non-Jewish doctor who's equally as capable as you are, and his services are as imminent as yours are, so then you let the non-Jew do it. But if you're the only person available, then you should anxiously try to violate the Shabbos in order to save a life. And the same thing would go for any other prohibition in the Torah, such as the one that we're dealing with now, which is stealing, right? Why let someone else save the life by stealing? You should steal so that you can save the life, because the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh is such an important mitzvah. Okay, so nidchos mipnei pikuach nefesh, that all prohibitions in the Torah are superseded by the mitzvah of life-saving. V'zeh amor imhu b'tzin'ah da'az kaimelon diyavor va'al yehareg. So he says, when it comes to this law of override the violation to save a life, is only when there's not a public issue involved. Because there, in that situation, we say, violate the law and don't allow yourself or another person to die. But the imhu rotze lahachmir al atzmo v'lei hareg, rashai hu bekach imhu roeh shaha'akum mechaven lahavir al hadas. There's one exception to the rule, and that is, let's say you recognize that a Gentile is putting you in a predicament in order to try to get you to violate your faith. He's dafka putting you in a predicament. He holds a gun to your head and he says, Jew, I want you to violate your Torah. If not, I'm going to shoot you. So you would say, is there a mitzvah to save my life by violating the Torah? Of course there is. And so therefore that's what you should do. But in this situation, if you see that the whole reason he's doing it is to get you to violate your faith, you're allowed to give up your life in that situation to show your dedication and your commitment to your faith. Aval hashach, that's what the Shulchan Aruch writes. Aval hashach sham sifkat and aleph hevi dedas aramim ve'od rishonim dechol mi shedino la'avor va'al yehareg v'nerag v'lo avar harezim ischayv b'nafsho ein sham. The Shach disagrees. The Shach is able to prove from the Rambam that no, that even in that situation, you have to violate the law and you're not allowed to give up your life. There's an old joke about Yaakov and Ivan, who are good friends. Yaakov is a Jew and Ivan is the Goy, and they're sitting talking to each other one day in the tavern, and Yaakov is drinking his beer and Yaakov is drinking his wine. And Yaakov says, Ivan says, this is fantastic wine. You must join me, Yaakov, in a glass of wine. And Yaakov says, Ivan, you're my best friend, but it's not kosher for me. I can't partake in your wine. And Ivan feigns that he's insulted. He says, how can you not share of what I've just offered you? I take that as a personal offense. He says, so Yaakov says, I don't mean to offend you. I can't. My faith doesn't permit me. And so then Ivan gets red in the face. He pulls out his revolver and he says, Jew, you drink or I'm going to shoot you. So trembling, Yaakov takes the glass of wine and he starts drinking and he downs the whole glass. And so then Ivan starts to let out a big belly laugh and he says, oh, Yaakov, you know, you're my best friend. I never would have done anything to you. So Yaakov says, gee, Ivan, that's too bad. So Ivan says, why is that too bad? He says, because I was hoping you would offer me that pork chop next to you next. So anyway, but that's the story about the Jew whose life is threatened. Of course, you're supposed to violate the Torah, even when someone is coercing you to do it, because they want to see how committed you are to your faith. Okay. And so then you are obligated to pay back. In other words, whenever you steal in order to save a life, it has to be with the intention of paying back the offended party when you have the ability to pay back. Rod Salomar, af im ka'es ein lo mima l'shalem mipnu shehu ani, which means that even if right now you don't have the ability to pay for the item that you're stealing, because you simply don't, you're not a wealthy person, mikol makom mutar lo lakachas b'tikva shehu mekavesh yuchal achar zman l'shalem. But you're still allowed to steal it with the hope. Listen, I hope one day I'll be able to pay for this. If it's $1 million cure, right? And there's no way that I can afford it, and the government is not funding this right now. So you can still justify stealing it if it's to save a life. Now, this, of course, gets into really interesting ethical issues in a real life situation. What if the Canadian government has a drug, but it is not, OHIP is not paying for it? So it's a really, really expensive kind of cure. And it's really the current medical literature is that it's the only way to cure the particular malady that this person has, which is life-threatening. So there is justification to go ahead and steal it and to do whatever you need to do, even if it involves underhanded behavior, if you know that this will save a life or it potentially can save a life. And I'm sure that there are many illustrations of this if any of our doctors want to opine on this issue. But it has to be with the objective of paying back. You have to actually at least have the intention of whoever has provided this, whether it's the pharmaceutical company or that you're stealing from, or whether it's a private party. Your intention has to be to eventually pay back to the best of your ability. And even if the cost of this object that you're stealing is so great that that you feel that you'll never be able to pay for it, because it's like millions and millions of dollars, this particular cure, there's still justification to steal it, because nothing stands in the way of saving a life. Now, of course, there's going to be some gray areas here, because maybe the Canadian government or OHIP says, well, our policy is that we treat this particular kind of cancer with this drug. But you know that the drug that they haven't approved yet is a better drug, or it has a greater level of efficacy. Let's say the drug that the Canadian government approves is a much cheaper drug, and it has, let's say, a 60% rate of success. And this drug, which is brand new and it just came out, has a 90% rate of success, but it's not yet approved by OHIP. Okay? That's where you get into these gray areas where you have to ask yourself the question, can you justify stealing or lying in those kinds of situations? Do our doctors want to weigh in over here? Any real life situations that you have encountered?
Yeah. it happens a lot, this particular situation, especially with cancer and drugs. And it usually involves insurance companies. And you have to almost try to sway the insurance companies in a certain way, but it's a very gentle sway because you can't overtly lie, but you have to sort of sway them in the you have to really convince them in a way that they'll go for it, but it may not be perfectly according to the rules. So there's some gray zone there that I have not heard of people that are actually stealing money to get this. If they do, it's usually a private thing that they're doing. But usually for us, the doctors, we're doing it through insurance swaying in a way to get money for a particular drug that they would not normally want to pay for.
Give me an example of a sway. What is a sway? What would you say to an insurance company?
So if a cancer is, they may demand that a cancer would be involving, say, 3 different organs. And you know that there's only 2 organs that it's involving that is outside of the primary cancer. You would use a word like multiple in different parts of the body. You would, and they would question you on that again, and then you'd have to almost lie to get the insurance company to pay for that, or to you come up with that extra organ where it is potentially found in order for you to get the drug. But you know that when the person gets that drug, their life is going to be completely changed, as opposed to the record where the OHIP system is using a drug that you know is not going to be very successful. And this has come up in situations, especially things like pancreatic cancer, where you know that they're using only one arm of a drug, and really, even if they combine it with another one, it will be better. So there have been situations where certain oncologists will actually provide that service, but it costs a lot of money. And so you need to go to private insurance companies to actually get them to agree.
Wow, interesting. Okay. So at least you shouldn't feel guilty about it, Joby, based on what we just learned today.
Well, you do feel guilty somewhat, but you don't really, because after dealing with insurance companies and realizing that their first and always statement is no, 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 you have to sort of coerce them. I mean, you have to really advocate for patients.
Wow. It's unfortunate that it's such an adversarial system, right? You would think everyone would be on the side of saving a life, but it doesn't work that way. Yeah. Okay. We'll hold it here for today, Rabbi Isai. I wish everyone a good Shabbos, and we'll see you, Mirza Shem, on Monday. Okay.